Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video, which is slightly different because we are not talking about a book, we are talking about a TV series. Disney Plus recently added The Artful Dodger onto their platform, and I of course watched the whole thing in one day because why wouldn't I? So this is supposed to be like a sequel to the classic Charles Dickens book Oliver Twist, and because it was marketed as a sequel, I thought it would be fun to compare it to the book itself and see how faithful it remains, what kind of an interpretation it was. And honestly, I don't know that anyone's going to be really that interested in this, but if you know me at all, you know that I will take any opportunity provided to me to talk about Oliver Twist. So that's what we're doing today. I've been very excited about this show. I knew it was coming. I had it marked in my calendar. I knew I was going to watch it all in one day. Particularly, I was excited about this, not just because I love Oliver. And when I say I love Oliver, I mean the film, the musical film, not the book. We know I have a very complex relationship with the book, but I was particularly very excited about this because Dodger and Fagin are my favourite characters. The whole criminal gang was the best part of Oliver, in my opinion, and I wish it had been focused on more. So I was very excited for this series where the focus would be more on that element of the story. I was also quite intrigued because it was a sequel, but Fagin was going to be in it, but Fagin's supposed to have been hanged in the book. So all in all, very excited, very interested to watch it. And overall, my opinions are very good of the show, but I did want to, like I said, just discuss its relevance to the book, because that is what I do here. I talk about books, so that's what we're doing. There'll be no spoilers in this, so if you do want to watch the show and you haven't yet, don't worry, nothing will be ruined here, no plot points revealed, no twists and turns unearthed. Yeah, it's safe. To give you a brief synopsis, if you're not sure what the show is about, it is a sequel, like I mentioned, to the book itself. It is set, I want to say, like 10-15 years after the end of the book. So Dodger has escaped prison. He joined the Navy, became a surgeon, and is now trying to make a life for himself in a penal colony in Australia, where the sort of wealthy English people who live there are trying to form a respectable society there. And he's trying to fit in, make a name for himself as a surgeon, and leave his criminal past behind. But of course what happens? Fagin comes along. Fagin returns, manages to end up in this colony that Dodger is in Australia, and attempts to lure Dodger back into his thievery and scheming ways. So, character-wise, I think this is the easiest way to compare this interpretation to the book. And I just want to say, I'm not saying that this needed to be the same as the book, because it's an interpretation at the end of the day. It's going to be different. It also, you know, was written now and not in like the 1800s when Oliver was written. But because it was marketed as a sequel, you expect the book characters and not the film characters that I am very used to. So I think a good place to see how similar that is and how good of a sequel this is to look at the difference in the characters. So Dodger. Dodger is one of my favourite literary characters of all time, and that is predominantly based on the Oliver film, not on the book. But anyway, he is very different in this show. So to remind you of in the book, he was, I suppose, you know, a child. So he's in this show 27, you know, he's going to be different, but he is described as, despite being a child, acting very much like an adult, taking things very seriously, very focused on the task at hand. And at that point, the task in hand was thieving and making money for Fagin. Also very loyal to Fagin, holds him in very high regard, and would do anything for him. Best thief in the gang, pretty much is sort of the leader almost of the gang because he's so successful, and yeah. just very good at being a little criminal. So that is Dodger in the book. In the show, at first glance, it feels very different. He is a surgeon. He's trying to make a better life for himself, and he's very focused on this and leaving the criminal world behind him. He doesn't want to get involved in that anymore. He cares if people are hurt or if laws are broken, and just generally very moral, which is very different. And you know, initially I was thinking this is not the character that I know and love. And then I was looking back at the book and I found a line that made me sort of question that a little bit. So I can't remember exactly where this is in the book. It's sort of describing Dodger as being, it's when they're sort of describing him as acting more like an adult and taking things quite seriously. And then it goes on to say that he seldom gave way to merriment when it interfered with business. Reading that line made me realise, actually, the Dodger in the show, that is accurate. His focus has just changed. He's not focused on the business of crime, he is focused on the business of being a surgeon, and that is what is most important to him. He's still focused, serious, determined. It's just that that has shifted onto something else now that he is no longer under the influence of people like Fagin and Bill Sykes, and he is out of this environment and he's had guidance from other people. His focus has shifted onto this. And there are many times throughout the show where he's, you know, people are trying to pull him in different directions, but he's just remaining determined on being a good surgeon and making that name for himself. So initially I wasn't disappointed because I still enjoyed the character, but initially I didn't think it was the Dodger that was in the books. But actually now, looking back at it, reflecting, looking in the book, I think it was actually an interesting and different take, but still using that core of him in there. In my personal opinion, he is too moral for me. I prefer thieving pickpocket Dodger, but that's just me. It was still interesting character. Thomas Brady Sangster did a great job, and I think was a fantastic casting pick, honestly. Sort of aesthetically speaking, very much had the look of Dodger, and just played that conflict between those two sides very well. My only criticism would be that I don't think after growing up in the East End of London, then being in the Navy for however long and living at sea, I don't think his voice would be that posh, but that's just a really small thing that doesn't really matter very much. But all in all, Dodger felt different, but still him as he was in the book. Then we come on to Fagin. So let's get out of the way. Fagin in the book, problematic as hell. Dickens' original character of Fagin was incredibly anti-Semitic and just, yeah, not great. Which has obviously been changed in various interpretations, and Dickens later in his life did go back and edit Oliver Twist a little bit to try and change that, but in my opinion he didn't really change enough for it to make a difference at all. Just my personal opinion. He in the book is he's just a villain. There are no real redeemable qualities for Fagin in the book. He is cunning, ruthless, doesn't really care who gets hurt, be it children, adults, women, whatever. He doesn't care. Happy to plot the murder of a child, doesn't really care that Nancy died. Manipulative. Yeah, he's written very unsympathetically in the book, and you know, there's been in other interpretations done a lot of change to that, but whenever I see a new creation of something to do with Oliver Twist, I am always a bit apprehensive about Fagin in it. And that is for two reasons. One, because of the original character they are basing it on being problematic, but also because they're not Ron Moody. And in my opinion, Ron Moody is Fagin. His portrayal of Fagin in the film was fantastic, and I don't think anyone will ever top it. That interpretation of Fagin is, I think, far more interesting and rich and enjoyable than the original Fagin in the book. So I'm always a bit like, oh, what are they gonna do and how is the person gonna approach that? And I have to say, pleasantly surprised. David Thewlis was somehow able to capture that manipulative, cunning, sort of scheming essence from the book, but also combine it with the more softer and sometimes caring side that they then sort of brought in the film and the musical, and it was fantastic. It was very, very good, and I was actually incredibly impressed with that interpretation, because I think it was a good balance, and there was still the sort of comedic element of Fagin at times, but also being able to see that cleverness that's hidden quite a lot of the time. Obviously, it wasn't that accurate to the book, really. There were parts of it that was, but I'd rather it wasn't accurate to the book, so I'm fine with that in this case. The only other character I'm going to very briefly talk about is Oliver. Obviously, there are a lot of other characters in this show, but none of them were really in the book, aside from one, but it's kind of a spoiler to mention that, so I'm not going to mention who that is. And the other characters, yeah, they're just not really relevant for what I'm talking about. So the only other person I'm going to mention is Oliver, who is really not in it that much. He's really not a major character, which I have no problem with, because we all know I hate Oliver as a character. He's the worst character in the book about himself. But anyway, Oliver in this was very, very different. It definitely was a different interpretation, but I didn't mind it at all. I think it's the only interpretation of this that I've seen where I didn't hate Oliver as a character, because I have in everything else that he's been in, because he's the worst. Again, I appreciate in the book it's very difficult because he's young, he's been through a lot, but he's just very annoying, very naive, very sweet. But in the show, we obviously see him grown up, and while I don't think that's how he would have grown up, the way that he's portrayed, it was very fun and more enjoyable than other versions of Oliver that I've seen. So, onto the plot. Obviously, this is more difficult to compare to the book because this is a completely new plot. So what I wanted to do more is look at how realistic this feels that this would have happened after the book. So firstly, Dodger being a surgeon, I'm just gonna say I don't feel like it doesn't feel very realistic to me, especially because, and I don't remember completely, but I am fairly certain that Dodger was transported to Australia. I don't think it's actually explicitly stated, but it's heavily implied. However, in the show, it doesn't seem like that's exactly what's happened. He's more just found his way here after escaping prison elsewhere, which I suppose is a bit of a change, but you know, if we're then being realistic, Dodger being transported there, he probably would not have had the same trajectory that he does in this show. And, you know, like I said, I think his character actually fits with that determination, focus, and all of that. But I do think that choice was a little bit out of character to do that. However, the actual plot itself of him being a surgeon was quite interesting. I don't know how historically accurate it was, because I haven't done research into that yet, but seeing the changes and advancement in medicine that they portrayed in the show was very interesting, and something that I hadn't really thought about too much before. So it was good, but if we're comparing it to the book, I think it's quite unlikely that that would have happened. Fagin himself, I'm just going to treat as a plot point, because the thing that makes this so confusing for me, if we're treating this as a sequel to the book, is Fagin was hanged. Like, there's no scene explicitly in the book showing him being hanged, but he was. And there's explanation in the show as to how this didn't happen, and part of the explanation you know, it's not clear whether this is Fagin being manipulative or not in the show, but even with the explanation we got, it just didn't make sense to me how he then ended up here. So I think that was the thing that was most confusing to me and potentially most disjointed from the book. However, the purpose that Fagin serves in the TV show and the plot, I think if we take out the fact that he should be dead, was fantastic and very, very accurate. We see that cunning side to him trying to create another criminal empire in Australia that's very different to what he was used to and had created in London. And we see that resourcefulness and slight chaos from him. There's the hidden intelligence, but you know, there's also the slight madness. All of the plot with Fagin was felt like it could be a good continuation from the book if it wasn't for the fact that he was dead. I think it also, like, just from a series perspective, balanced out the slower, more like long-term plot of the rest of the show. It slotted in nicely, but also kept the intrigue there with the more slow burn plot that was also going on. Finally, the romance. So this is not necessarily related to the book, because it's very difficult to comment on whether this is likely to have happened or not, because obviously Dodger was still very young in the book. But my personal feeling about the romance that was added into the show, at first I just felt it was unnecessary. Then I didn't think that quite so much. It wasn't, you know, the development of it and the characters, you know, the love interest, very interesting character, entire family was very interesting. It was a decent plot point. It did feel maybe at times a little unnecessary, but I do think it served a purpose that is not necessarily related to the actual book itself, but actually related to Dickens' books on the whole, in that it served to highlight the classic themes of classism and rich versus poor that are present in Dickens' books, which makes it therefore feel more like Dickens, if that makes sense at all. That theme was somewhat present anyway, but it mainly hinged on that, and it was mainly reinforced and shown through the romance, which, yeah, made it feel like it fitted more. So while I don't think it was wholly necessary, and I would have happily just watched a show about Fagin and Dodger doing Fagin and Dodger things, it served a purpose, and I think it fulfilled that well. Overall, just looking at it from the perspective of just a TV series, it was very enjoyable. It was really, really good. Would definitely recommend people watching it regardless of if you particularly like Oliver Twist or not. Obviously you'll enjoy it more if you do like Oliver Twist, but I do think it was just a good show in its own right. I'm not sure that I would necessarily call it a sequel. It's a good interpretation, a good adaptation, a good new perspective on these characters, but I'm not sure I would go as far as to call it a sequel to the book, because there was enough differences that it was noticeable that they weren't the same, but not so much that it was like annoying, if that makes sense. There were as well, and this may have just been me reaching slightly as a slightly obsessive person, but I do think there were some like little hints and references to other Dickens works and previous Oliver interpretations in there, which I thoroughly enjoyed personally. There was a moment that would have been perfect for my favourite line from the film. Shut up and drink your gin! But it wasn't there. It's not supposed to be an interpretation of the film. I mean, I would love that. I would love a sequel to the film. I would like to know what happened after Dodger and Fagin skipped off into the sunset together and what they went and did afterwards, but I doubt we're ever going to get that. But yeah, there was a moment where I was like, oh, that would have been perfect for that line, but yeah, it was not that. So far, there is no confirmation that there's going to be a season 2, and it's looking very unlikely that there will be one. I think the show left off in a good enough way that it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if there was another one, but I do think it would be really good if there was another series. So if you have the time and you're particularly interested in the show, there is a petition for a second season, so I'll put it down below if you want to sign it, because I binged the whole thing in one day and I would like another season of it if it's possible. If you've watched the show, let me know what you think. If you've watched it and you're a fan of the book, or you've read it, then what do you think in terms of how it sort of compared and continued on the story? Because I think I am still a little on the fence, but I enjoyed the show enough that it doesn't bother me that much that there were some things that didn't really add up. But all in all, a very good show. I appreciate this is a slightly different video. We will be going back to books as normal after this. It was just, I like talking about Oliver. I will talk about it whenever I get the chance to. So I hope you have enjoyed. Anyway, I hope you're having wonderful days, evenings, nights, wherever you are, and I will see you very soon. Bye guys.